you found from talking to marketing executives there really is such a thing as cradle-to-grave marketing.
Yes.
What does that mean?
Well, it ostensibly means that you have a customer for life. And it's not a new phenomenon. It's probably been in the works for the past 10 years or so. But what I think is new is cradle had been used euphemistically, meaning really school-aged kids, what the marketing industry now calls tweens. And what I was looking at are really where all of these issues start with babies and toddlers. And 0 to 3-year-olds really are now considered, it's still not very sort of politically correct for any entertainment executive or marketing executive to come right out and say, yes, we market to babies, we want to keep them as customers, but they're doing it. And they'll all tell you sort of, on background, we're doing it. And the whole premise of cradle-to-grave marketing is that you can make a couple $100,000 from the same customer in his or her lifetime.
One executive actually told you the moment a baby can see clearly, she becomes a consumer.
Yes. Well, the minute they can, focus on, the McDonald's arches, really on the Disney Winnie the Pooh, all of these characters that are so appealing to very young children often are drawn in primary colors, have very high contrast. It's really, sort of a Piagetian reality that, that little children gravitate to creatures that look like themselves, with big eyes and chubby cheeks, and particularly Elmo, who really speaks in what's known as motherese, which is that sort of, oh, hi, how are you? And, the way that a mother or really anybody talks to a baby or a toddler and is actually sort of shown to improve language comprehension because we stretch out vowels and so forth.
You found that these characters are used by companies and marketers to really increase consumerism among very, very small children.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that what is really sort of striking about it is that that they don't really understand the underlying narrative. One might say, but Elmo's such a great guy. And, he really, or Clifford, for example, really sort of helps kids understand how to be a better citizen and how to share and have compassion. Well, a 2.5-year-old child, first of all, isn't developmentally really able to conjure up any kind of empathy until they're, sort of past that developmental milestone, so that they're really not getting. But also, on the other hand, the cuts are too quick for them on television. That's one of the issues, is that they just don't track from one cut to the next cut to the next cut. They don't have the connective tissue to be able to bridge in between those cuts to be able to sort of understand, what one person, sort of a whole sort of narrative line. So what they're really just gravitating to is the merchandising. I mean, a case in point, I think, are the Disney princesses, that sorority of sort of brands. Andy Mooney, who's in charge of Disney Consumer Products, came over from Nike, actually, and recognized very early on in his tenure that princesses were lifestyle brands to very little girls. That the children, that toddlers and 3-year-olds might not really understand that Cinderella, for example, was an abused child who had to summon up faith and courage and make friends with sort of unlikely salt of the earth kind of characters in order to sort of prevail and survive. They don't understand that. But what they do understand is that the merchandising is everywhere.
What is the impact of all this sensory overload on these very small children? What did you find?
Well, one thing that I found, in terms of how babies, real babies, not toddlers, but babies process television, is that well, first of all, it's very hard to understand what they are learning, if they're learning anything from television. But really, I guess anything, to a baby is a learning experience. But, and that's what a lot of these companies say. But then again, child abuse is also a learning experience.
But is it damaging to kids at this?
It turns out that there are only sort of hypotheses that can be posited by the research psychologists at Georgetown and at University of Massachusetts, ones that I talked to. The leading hypothesis is that babies are sort of caught up in what's called an orienting reflex loop. The orienting reflex is a sort of startle reflex that we all have. When we hear a loud sound, we sort of startle. We need to sort of figure out, where it came from, if we need to fight or flight. And television is so stimulating to little babies that they startle when they see an image. They begin to sort of try to figure out how to respond to it. And then the scene changes, and they startle all over again and see how they should respond to it, and then it just changes. Particularly Baby Einstein videos, the scenes just change one right after the next, and a lot of babies will sit there just sort of watching it. And one hypothesis again is that they just can't get themselves out of this orienting reflex loop.
Is that harmful?
Can be great. I don't think that, there is no research right now that shows what the long-term, there's really at the ground floor of understanding what all of this sensory stimulation is doing to children. As one of the preeminent research psychologists said, we are basically running a vast and uncontrolled experiment on America's babies and toddlers. We have no idea